I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 225 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. Are you still a financial child? This is part 2 of our 4-part finance series. So if you are just jumping in and missed last week's episode, you may want to take a moment to go back and listen to that one because there is a bit of context that's going to carry through from week to week in this series. If you heard me last week, you heard me say we're re-airing this series that was originally done a number of years ago. And so I know it's going to be new to a lot of you because the listenership of the podcast has grown so much in that time. And, let's face it, it's hard to go back through more than 200 episodes and find everything that's been aired. So I am really thrilled with the feedback we got on last week's episode. This one, when it aired originally, was probably the most provocative of all 4 of the weeks. And I think it has something to do with that nomenclature of being a financial child. So I hope you find something really useful in this. I'm delighted to share it with you. And I hope that in particular this week really helps you grow into the relationship that you are meant to have with money and with your finances. Okay, here we go. And today, what we're going to do is continue on our financial series, and we're going to talk about some ways to determine if you are still operating as a financial child. This is a term that I'm coining to illustrate the point. So before you assume you know exactly what I mean by that, and before you layer a lot of guilt or shame onto that terminology, just stay with me for a minute while we unpack this because I think it's going to be a really helpful metaphor for us to work with. I want to assure you as we get going here that I am sharing today's message truly out of a deep desire to see you step into your full potential in life, out of a desire to see you push past anything that is holding you back or limiting you. And sometimes to do that, we have to confront patterns that we've been ignoring, or we have to come to terms with blind spots that we've had about our behavior. So there is no judgment coming at you today. And if this conversation or some of the language that we use triggers an emotional response in you, let it surface and just ask yourself why that is. Why is that happening? What's the story that you're telling yourself? What's the nudge that you're feeling to maybe make some adjustments? And this whole episode idea, this framework of financial childhood really came to me because I've been thinking a lot lately in different areas of life about what it means to operate as a child versus an adult. And I think honestly, it's become because we have a young teenager in our house. So my daughter's 13, almost 14. And there are moments where we are so clearly straddling 2 worlds, sort of waffling back and forth as I watch her in some moments behave almost fully as an adult and in others, go back to childlike behaviors. And that's, of course, completely normal in adolescence. And that's the whole point of adolescence. But I think even as adults, there are places where we vacillate, where one moment we have it all together, we have a long-range focus, we're fully embodying adulthood, and in the next, we've reverted to our own 10-year-old selves. So what we're going to talk about today is one of those areas of life where we are prone to this vacillation, to reverting to childhood, and that's finances. And I'm going to help you assess whether you most often, think and behave as a financial adult or a financial child. Because the truth is you might do some of each depending on the situation. I do. And let me just say, this has nothing to do with how old you are. It's not uncommon for very young adults or teenagers to behave with great maturity when it comes to money, and vice versa for people who have been on this planet a very long while to still be operating as a financial child. And there are some good reasons why this pattern seems to be so prevalent. I think if you look at least in the United States, financial education has really not been a priority. I certainly was never taught anything about financial management in school. I think the current data is less than half of the states require students to take a high school course in personal finance. I think only about 20 teachers, the data says, feel competent to teach personal finance topics. That's a study that was done fairly recently. And the same study found that most parents, 72% of parents, have some level of reluctance to talk to their kids about financial matters. It's an area where we sort of stick our heads in the sand and expect that kids are going to figure it out. So if you are feeling in the dark about financial matters, if you feel like you really weren't given a solid education about finance, you're certainly not alone. And that can have long-standing repercussions. So what we're going to talk about today are more behavior patterns than knowledge gaps, right? We're going to talk more about behaviors and how those behaviors may be signs that you're operating as a financial child. There are 3 of them. And once I get through these 3, we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do if you would like to go on the path to financial adulthood. What are, some things you probably should know how to do if you want to start to shift that pattern. All right. So here, let's get into the 3 signs that you might be operating as a financial child, no matter your age. The first one is if you need permission to spend money. If the dynamic in your life is that you need permission from someone to spend money, then you are probably operating as a financial child. So think about why that makes sense. There are rules that we establish for children about spending money. They have to come to us and ask for our permission because we really don't trust them to make wise decisions, right? And also because the money is often not theirs. It's ours. It's been allocated to them. So we hold the controls in the decision as parents. But when you're an adult and you still find that you need permission in order to spend money, you want to ask yourself why that is. What is the dynamic that you are in? How did it become that way? Whose permission do you need? Some people need permission from their spouse. Some spouses require it. Some partners just can't give themselves permission to spend money without getting permission from their spouse, right? So there's 2 sides to that dynamic. Sometimes it's like, wow, I'd love to make that decision, but my spouse requires that I get his permission or I get her permission. And then vice versa. Sometimes your spouse is like, please, by all means, make these decisions, but you feel the need to go and get someone else's blessing before you make that decision. Why is that? What is that dynamic? What is it telling you about your level of trust or their level of trust? How did it get that way, right? What's the source of that pattern? And are you comfortable with it? Is that a pattern you'd like to stay in, or is it one that you would like to change, but you're not sure how? I want you to really sit with those questions if you've never thought about it before, because not all relationships work that way. Not all relationships require permission. Sometimes, certainly, there is buy-in, right? There's a request for support. There's a sharing of the plan so that no one is, in the dark. But when it's framed as permission, that's sort of the clue to your operating as a financial child. So that's the first one. If you notice that you need permission from someone else in order to spend money, it's a clue that you are operating as a financial child. Either they don't trust you or you don't trust yourself. Okay, the second sign that you may be operating more from a position of financial childhood is if you think your money, the money that you earn, is to be used for fun and someone else should handle all of the more mundane or necessary expenses like shelter, insurance, savings accounts. If that's how you are viewing your earnings, that your earnings are to be used for fun and that someone else should be taking care of the needs that you have, that is a sign of financial childhood. Because think about how our children operate, right? Children believe that their needs will be taken care of by their parents, as they should, And that anything they earn from, maybe babysitting or a lemonade stand or that they're given for their birthday, that's for fun. That's the things that they can do to put the icing on the cake. 100% appropriate, they're children. That's how the world works, right? But as an adult, when we stay in that dynamic, how does that play out? What I'm interested in here is the carryover effect of that dynamic into other elements, potentially of your relationship. Okay, now I want to take a group of people and explain that this is not about you. If you are a full-time caretaker or a homemaker, right, and you have an agreement and you and your spouse are just super on the same page about you not having an income, them providing for the financial needs of the household, and you are not in a dynamic where you have to ask for permission to spend money or there's a lot of conflict about money, and you have adequate opportunity to do some things for fun with money that's at your discretion, and you know that the needs of the household are being met. Great. This is really not who I'm talking to about this point. Who I'm talking to about this point, where I see this play out a lot, is where one spouse is the primary earner in the household and the other spouse has a small supplemental income, and their belief is that that small supplemental income should be used for fun extras. So my spouse is taking care of all of our needs, shelter, insurance, savings, the cars, etc. And my money is like for fun extras. And that is a pattern that is a carryover from childhood. We don't have a belief that any of our money should be spent on things that are like boring, right? Or mundane or necessary, that it should all be fun. That can be okay. You can acknowledge that pattern and say, you know what? It's working in our household. But I want you to look at it as a potential source of conflict. It's a potential dynamic that you may not realize you're in that can have some pretty significant repercussions to the power dynamic in the household or to a level of resentment. Because if one spouse is saying, well, I'm working, but my income has to cover all of these things that I don't really get a lot out of, putting a new roof on the house, right? Replacing the windows, taking care of lawn care. Those are not things that have a high joy factor, but they're necessary. And 100% of the second income is being used for fun things that can really create an imbalance and an opportunity for conflict. So there are alternatives. One alternative would be, regardless of the income distribution split between the two, to take all of the money and pool it and then allocate it in the same pattern, right? So 90% of that money is going to go from everyone's earnings. 90% of the money is going to go to needs and 10% is going to go to these fun things that both of you have discretion over making choices to spend. That creates a different dynamic in the relationship. So that's why we're really pointing this out, is if you have a strong belief that your money should be used for fun and someone else should take care of all the needs, that is a sort of symptom or sign of financial childhood. And you want to make sure that it is not having unintended consequences in the dynamics in your relationship. If you're in that dynamic and it is mutually agreeable to everyone, then it's not an issue for you, right? You have to be able to know the difference. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. The third pattern or the third sign that you want to look for is if you hear yourself saying, I'm just not good with money, or I don't like to talk about money, then you're operating more as a financial child. And of the three that we've talked about today, this particular one is arguably the most dangerous. So thankfully, it's entirely in your control, right? This one is really worth addressing before there is a crisis that forces you to. Because what do you do when there is no choice? When you've spent your whole life saying, I'm just not very good with money. I just don't know a lot about money. I don't like to talk about money. What do you do when you have to grow up really quickly? There's a really sort of famous story in my family that my grandmother had never written a check in her life when her husband died unexpectedly at 62. My grandfather went to bed one night a healthy man and didn't wake up the next morning. My grandmother was left with the family farm to run, a lot of decisions that had to be made, a lot of financial matters that had to be managed, and she had literally, as the story goes, never written a check. I have friends, you probably do too, who ended up divorced or widowed through scenarios beyond their wildest imaginations. They were not planning to be the chief financial officer of their household, but all of a sudden saying, I'm not good with money or I don't like to talk about money wasn't viable anymore. So why not do some things, get some grounding here before there's a crisis, right? Wouldn't it be healthier to go through that process when there's not a lot of pressure attached to it? I think that's a far healthier, and I'm going to get into what are just a few things that if you connect with this statement, you probably want to put some time and attention against learning, right? You want to build a plan for yourself to learn and do some things about money so that you feel a level of confidence. Because ultimately, having a level of confidence about managing money, both earning it and spending it, is one of the big enablers to really having the impact that you want to have in the world. When you feel really constrained about money or really tangled up around an understanding of it, it's difficult to have the impact that you intend to have. Okay? So if you recognize yourself in the characteristics of a financial child, the 3 patterns that I shared, I want you to ask yourself, who or what is really keeping me from becoming a grown-up? What would I have to do to become an adult around money? And I think here's how I'm defining financial adulthood. Being able to say yes to the things and the experiences that mean the most to you by figuring out how to have the money that you need for them. I'm going to say it again. Being able to say yes to the things and the experiences that mean the most to you by figuring out how to have the money that you need for them. I think that's what we all want. And in order to do that, you have to know how to do some things. I'm going to name 7. This is kind of a long list, so stay with me here. There are 7 things I think at the foundation you want to be able to do to claim that financial adulthood. The first is you want to know how to be an earner. Okay, you want to know how to earn an income. It doesn't matter how big it is. But there's this notion of being able to earn money when you want to that opens up possibilities for you. So when you feel constrained and tight about money and you feel like you don't have enough and you can't get to it, focusing on being an earner is the first step toward adulthood. Again, you may be making a choice right now in whatever chapter you're in not to be earning money. I have had 3 separate periods in my life where there was an intentional choice not to be an earner for a period of time. I took 1-year maternity leaves with my children, and they were unpaid maternity leaves. So there are certainly periods of time when you may step out of the workforce. You may step out of an earning mode, but you want to know how to step in whenever you want to. Okay, so it's the knowledge of knowing and having the confidence that you can earn an income when you want to that opens up possibilities. The second thing you want to have is you want to have a bank account in your name. So if you don't already have a bank account, you want to get one, right? You want to know how to open an account and how to manage that account. Probably a checking account, maybe a savings account, maybe an emergency fund, but you want to have access to funds. I have watched women end up in situations where they could not get access to money because they did not have a bank account in their name. Make sure you have this. Okay. Third thing is you want to know how to pay the bills. You don't necessarily have to be the one doing it regularly today, although it's helpful because when you are paying the bills, you are very close to the financial picture. You know the incomes, right? The inflows, and you know all the outflows. But whether or not you're actively doing it, you certainly want to make sure you know how to do it, that you know how to access those accounts, you know how to get money paid, you know how to manage the cash flow situation for your household. So an ability to pay the bills is the third. Fourth one is you want to know how to build a budget. Now, if you don't need to be super strict about a budget right now, that's fantastic. That means there's enough money coming in that it doesn't require you to count every penny going out. And that's actually a great, healthy way to live. You can live within a loose construct of a budget, but you have to have the skill of how to build a budget, understanding, kind of your monthly income as a household, your ongoing expenses, your episodic expenses, the ones that might happen once a year or once a quarter that you might want to be accruing money for, like insurance payments or tuition or taxes, right? You want to understand, how does the money flow in and out of your household? And that is what we call a budget. So you want to know how to build one that works for your household, whether or not you're in super strict adherence to it right now. The fifth thing you want to know how to do is save. You want to be accruing savings. I think we would all agree one of the hallmarks of adulthood is delayed gratification, the ability to wait to get what you want. And savings is a great way to practice this skill. So you want to have accrued savings for an emergency fund or for retirement or toward a long-term goal, and be able to build that into the financial plan for your household. The sixth one is about credit. You need to be able to use credit well and know your credit score, right? So having a good credit score will serve you remarkably well throughout your life. It gives you access to money when you need it. So you want to get familiar with it now. You want to know how to pull like a free credit report. There are a number of sources that do that, like credit.com is one of them, like annualcreditreport.com. There are a number of these websites where you can get a free credit report at least annually. And you really want to understand what's affecting your credit score. And then you want to start building your credit. So, having a credit card and using it well will really help you continue to have access to capital when you need it, right? So that looks like having a card, but paying off the balance monthly when the bills come in. You want to keep your credit score moving in the right direction because, again, it's a great protection so that you have access to money when you need it. And then the last piece, which I think really scares a lot of people, is you want to know how to invest. You want to understand what an investment is and how to make them and the various types of them. Because without investments that grow over time, without some of your money being allocated to working for you through an investment, it's just too hard to get ahead financially. So knowing enough about investing to be in the game is a really important piece of financial adulthood. And we're going to talk more about investment in an upcoming episode, but I think that's kind of the pinnacle of these 7 steps to financial adulthood. I'm going to recap them here. The first was be an earner, then have a bank account in your name, pay the bills, know how to pay the bills, know how to build a budget, save, right? Emergency funds, retirements, long-term goals. The 6th one is use credit wisely and know your credit score. And the 7th is know how to invest. So those elements are what are going to help you stop saying, I'm just not good with money. If you can do those things, guess what? You are good with money, right? Those are the outcomes of being in a good place with money, having a level of skill and capability in managing your money. They're going to make it easier for you to talk about money because you'll have the vocabulary, right? You'll understand the principles around which money operates. And those other 2 patterns that we talked about today that you want to be aware of that could indicate that you are, falling back into financial childhood is if you need permission to spend money, if you have kind of deemed your money as being for fun and someone else's money as being to handle all of the necessities, that would be the 3rd pattern of potentially being in financial childhood. So we've covered a lot today to help you assess where are you on that spectrum. And I think the most important thing is, what do you do with it? Let's say you come through listening to today's episode and you have this realization that you are operating as more of a financial child than an adult. this is an absolutely fantastic time to decide, are you willing to let that go on? You know, what is it costing you to be operating as a financial child? Are you okay with the outcomes that is creating in your life, or do you want to make a change? And if you want to make a change, those 7 steps that I outlined are really the basics of what you want to learn how to do in order to go on that path to financial adulthood. Because when you go on that path, the way you see the world will change. The possibilities that you see available to you will look different when you have that knowledge. This is something that I want for everyone. I want it for my children as they move toward adulthood. These are very important principles that we really want everyone to have. And I know they've made a huge difference in my life. One of the things that gives me reassurance and confidence in the future is my knowledge of those 7 things that I shared today. You know, being in a position where I've walked through that path, and it puts you on such solid ground to be able to build a future. And one of the biggest enablers that we didn't spend a lot of time on it today is that notion of being an earner. So the next time we're together, in the next episode, we'll do the 3rd segment of this financial series. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about income. And we're going to help you decide if you've maxed out your income potential or if you have room to grow. Hint, you probably have room to grow. But I think so many people are really constricted by feeling like there is no more money available to them. And because of that, there's all this limitation and constriction happening. And we're going to move that discussion into something that feels a lot more expansive in our next episode. So we covered so much ground today, everybody. If you have something to add to this discussion, if you had a realization about your own life, or if you see a pattern that maybe I missed that I did not talk about today, I would love to hear from you. Please join me in the Brilliant Balance Facebook group, which is where we're having a lot of these discussions, and post your thoughts. I'd really love to hear your perspective on this and some ideas on things that we all can do to continue on the journey to financial adulthood. Till next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.